guest who needs no introduction, but for any of you that don't know, Dr. Ben is a trailblazing resident physician on a mission to bridge the gap between the medical world and the public. Dr. Ben brings a unique perspective to the field as a trans man, weaving personal experiences and professional expertise to communicate current issues in medicine with authenticity and empathy. As a proud member of the LGBTQ plus community, Dr. Ben understands the importance of representation in healthcare. He's breaking down barriers and fostering understanding by sharing his journey as a trans man in the medical field. And Dr. Ben is not just a doctor, he's a voice for inclusivity, diversity, and compassionate care. Dr. Ben is a regular contributor to the conversation on online programs such as the Transatlantic Call-In Show, woo, Talk Heathen, and his own channel, Family Dr. Ben, where he addresses medicine, skepticism, and LGBTQ plus rights. So, Dr. Ben, welcome back to the show. We are so glad to have you back. Thank you for joining us.
Super excited to be back. And for those of you that saw a similar talk to this one just a few weeks ago, hopefully you get something out of this one as well. And let me share my screen here.
Yeah.
So now there's a lot going on in the media right now as far as like the vaccine issue, and there's going to be like some good information to take away from this with regard to the facts themselves, but primarily the goal is to address the kind of friction involved with the rhetoric and how to kind of address specific arguments or specific conversations. So it's definitely taking more of the rhetoric approach and less so a straight factual medical approach. However, happy to address questions kind of along the way about either side of this. So just kind of kicking it off, we have here the CDC definition of a vaccine. So we're all clear on what we're talking about. So usually this is a suspension of either a live organism or inactivated microorganism. It could be fractions of that particular agent or genetic material that's given usually through an injection to prevent infectious disease and induce immunity, preventing complications, saving lives, all that. So that is the definition that we will be working with today. So just kind of an overview of the history of vaccines. This is not a new thing. There's evidence even going back into ancient times of Chinese civilizations and other civilizations utilizing a similar approach, however, kind of a bit less polished maybe at that time, similar to kind of what a lot of people will think of Edward Jenner being kind of the first one to really be credited with vaccine development. And it's really kind of gross what he did, just taking, I try not to be too disgusting here, but taking infected like pus from cows and other animals and then giving that to children, and it helped them not get sick. So pretty disgusting, but that's kind of how this idea made its way into the scientific community. We have, of course, a bunch of other vaccines on this list that kind of developed over time. And so just pointing out that even though we think of vaccines as being this very modern clinical idea, it stems from, a long history of traditional medicine and all of that. So this isn't anything new. In the same way, hesitancy about vaccines is also not at all new. So I have several examples here of propaganda specifically against vaccination. You have Death the Vaccinator up there. You have a vaccination snake and the big spooky skeleton with like a bed sheet. A mom carrying her baby away. One of my favorites here is this Antivax Society of America. And I'm going to read this one for you. It says, an association of half-mad, misguided people who write and toil and dream of a time to come when it shall be lawful to retain intact the pure body Mother Nature gave, sends greeting to a suspect. Liberty cannot be given, it must be taken. You're invited to join us. And this is from 1902. And then, of course, in the bottom right corner, we have some more modern propaganda, specifically nationalist propaganda and how that relates to kind of this movement. But of course, that is from the COVID pandemic, and people saying that this was fake, reject poison, end the lockdowns, all of that. And it should make you question, the fact that you have this idea of opposing vaccination and having that being directly tied to white supremacist organizations and white nationalist groups. The fact that they connect these issues together is a bit concerning. But we won't get too far into the weeds of that today. But here's one from 1885 in Canada. And this was an article published by a physician. And you can see this is a whole lot of interesting information. So this person claims that uh, vaccination has been weighed in the balance and found wanting. Vaccination does not prevent smallpox in any cases. Vaccination does cause loathsome and often fatal diseases. Many children are killed outright, and thousands have had their health ruined by it. That vaccination does not lessen severity or fatality of smallpox. Um, and that they're saying the only safeguard is pure air, cleanliness, and healthy lifestyle things. So we have rhetoric back from 1885 that is pretty similar, if not spot on, to rhetoric that has been used in today's society. And they say here in all capitals, proof. This is their proof that what they're saying is true. And that is their proof is that these physicians felt icky about it and they just know that this is bad. And this is, of course, an appealing to authority fallacy here. They're saying that because they are physicians and because they are members of, prestigious organizations, that they are therefore credible in just saying, I feel that this is true. I have my intuition that this is correct information. They don't provide any evidence to back up their claim that vaccine virus is a poison. They just say it and assume people will believe them. Some more modern rhetoric is there's a documentary, if I can even say the word documentary. There's a documentary-like movie produced in 1982 called DPT Vaccine Roulette. And this was meant to expose all the side effects of the DPT vaccine, saying that, there are children that were getting seizures and therefore, you don't know what this is going to do to your kids. You don't want your kids having seizures. You don't want them to die from seizures, all that. But the children that were having these seizures, for the most part, had no long-term effects. We know that there are times when children will get seizures, either from vaccine exposure or even from fevers, which also can be a side effect of vaccines. And this wasn't enough to say this is a significant reason to let people risk getting DPT and let children getting any of those diseases. But the panic from this resulted in many lawsuits, declining vaccination rates, and then this led to the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act of 1986, which established a no-fault system for reporting adverse effects. And to this day, if you believe that there is an adverse effect that has happened to you from a vaccine, you can report it. And that's something that we have to think about. What information is being reported and by whom, and what is being done with that information. And the fact is, like, anybody can report any of this. And even if it's not related, they can say it's related, they can believe it's related, they can report it. So just saying that people have had experiences, while we don't want to invalidate somebody's experience, it is important to think about what information is being reported and what is being done with that information.
Dr.
And of
Ben,
course, we
the
have,
pandemic was
yeah.
about 2 years old, and one of the ACA shows had a call from a woman claiming to be a physician in the UK,
Mhm.
claiming that that database was proving that the COVID vaccine was killing people.
Yeah, and we'll get into that. But yeah, there are people that can say things, and they will use their position to claim that that is evidence in favor of that. And speaking of situations like that, we have the Wakefield study, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, from 1998, which had a sample size of 12. So only 12 children were used in the study, which for really any human subject studies, that is abysmally small. There's really not much information you can get from that size of a sample. But it claimed that there was an existing link between autism and the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine, and it was retracted due to misinformation and ethics violations. So, of course, this is where we get our big correlation versus causation rhetoric, saying that, well, we see an increase in autism in children that had the MMR vaccine, therefore it is causing that, and of course, that is not great reasoning to make a decision. The data was cherry picked. There was selection bias within that sample population. So the 12 children that were used in this study already had a certain type of issue that they were trying to target. So they did not randomize who they were including in this, and their selection criteria is kind of sketchy. And they also, of course, just falsified a lot of their data. So this is one of the studies that people will go back to, saying that, this is the link that we're looking for. This is why we don't want these vaccines. And then a lot of people also will say that the fact that it was retracted is further evidence of a conspiracy and not that it was bad science. So
Was there some conflict of interest regarding that study, also regarding Wakefield, like selling a different kind of vaccine?
um I'm not sure, but I could see that being part of it as well. And speaking of that, this goes greatly with this next slide. So this particular image is from uh, like an article that was published in 2021, just kind of addressing the psychology of vaccine hesitancy and relating it kind of back to um, other perspectives related to science, and even other conspiracy theories. So you have, of course, surface attitudes, and this is the statements that people will make, or kind of the way people will approach a particular issue. You have multiple listed here, like vaccines are toxic. You have statements like humans were created in their present form. So you have some religious statements here. You have maybe some people who ascribe to more new age beliefs, like my future's in the stars. You have genetically modified food is bad. You have climate change denial. And all of that, of course, is a perspective that these people hold. However, there's depth to these statements. There are reasons why people adhere to certain beliefs. And so while it is important to address the facts, there are a lot of times when people will not be receptive to the facts because the fact isn't why they believe it. The reason they might believe is because they have a social identity related to this. Like we see this, of course, with religion. You see somebody that, they are proud to be a Christian. They don't want to stop being a Christian. And therefore, even if they believe that evolution is true, they might still deny evolution because it conflicts with a couple of things here, their ideologies and social identities. Um, Additionally, you have like personal identity related to that. You have people especially with this case with vaccines, you have people very anxious and um, they're scared. People are scared of like what risks are there, especially if you don't have all of the information. You're scared of what's going to happen to your kid if you make a particular decision. If you take responsibility for whatever's happening, if you have to make that decision for does my child get this vaccine or not, you as the parent have to live with those consequences and you have to make that decision. And that is a very, very scary decision to make. Other things like fear of interactions with healthcare professionals, which there are plenty of reasons that many people have to be wary of the healthcare system. There are a lot of problems in the healthcare system. There are a lot of people who should not be working in the healthcare system. There's a whole history of very problematic experimentation within the medical community that um, certain minority groups are reasonably hesitant. And so if you look at it from those lenses, even if you present certain facts, there is some reasonable distrust. So when you're having discussions about really any of these topics, it's important to understand, am I approaching this in a way that's really addressing the underlying issue? Some people love to just address facts. Like that's kind of the way I see a lot of issues. I can be kind of persuaded in one way or another just based on, data presented, but not everybody feels the same way. Some people may have a more of an emotional connection. So it's important to recognize that and not talk past each other with regard to any issues. And of course, that goes back to religion as well. And for any of you that have attended my earlier presentations with RfRx, you would know that I have some very strong feelings about the use of intuition in really anything. And so for each kind of topic that we break down, I've got a little kind of statement to summarize what we're dealing with. So with intuition, we have this statement of, doesn't it just make sense that blank? And this is kind of a dangerous statement to make because um, intuition's great for certain things, but it's really not great for others. And we have here our advantages and disadvantages. Intuition is great for being very fast. It's low effort. You can just make a gut decision, and a lot of times as you gain life experience, a lot of times you're correct. A lot of times your intuition does point you in the correct direction because it relies on your prior knowledge and past experience, which is great if you have prior knowledge and past experience, and if that prior knowledge is reliable. So, of course, you'll have times, growing up that you learn that by experience, if you turn in your homework on time, you're probably going to get a better grade. Um, you can apply that same knowledge to a work scenario. Even if someone doesn't tell you specifically, hey, you have to show up to work on time, you have to do your work kind of by the deadline, by your past experience that you should do that. It's fairly common sense that you should do that because you have that prior knowledge and experience that over and over and over again kind of gave you that same information. Um, the problem is when we think we have prior knowledge but don't, that can be pretty dangerous. Um, so I think intuition is a great place to like start asking questions. It's a place where you can say, I believe I see this pattern. I have this experience. And then from there, you still have to investigate, right? Because if I have intuition that points me in one direction and somebody else has intuition that points them in a completely different direction, let's say religion, since this is recovering from religion, if somebody says that I just have a gut feeling that Jesus is the correct God, and somebody else says, no, I have the same intuition, but I believe that Krishna is God, you're probably not both correct. Somebody's going to be wrong in this situation. And you can't only rely on intuition. You have to do further investigation. So it's a great place to ask questions, but just be careful that we're not using common sense to make decisions especially about medically complex situations or situations of very high stakes where people can be hurt. And so a real world example of this particular question is, doesn't it just make sense to space out childhood vaccines? And this argument, depending on your background and your perspective, you can get a pretty intense gut reaction to this. And somebody who has worked in medicine or who has read a lot of the data related to vaccine studies would say, yeah, it does make sense to keep them on the current schedule because the data suggests that we're avoiding high risk periods within childhood development. We are preventing things before they happen. So from my perspective, yeah, my common sense says that we should keep the schedule as it is, unless better data comes along to tell us maybe we need to adjust it. However, somebody who doesn't have that experience might say, you know, I understand that there's a lot of vaccines given at the same time, and babies crying, it's painful sometimes. Sometimes they get fevers, they get cranky, all that. And it is fairly reasonable to think, do we need all these at the same time? Like, what if we just spaced them out a little bit? Like, is it really that bad if I wait? Um, and so it's easy to kind of empathize with those people and say, yeah, from your experience, it sounds reasonable. Your perspective sounds reasonable. However, when you understand it more, that perspective becomes less and less reasonable. Um, so, some things to ask people with regard to this question or other intuitive questions is, how did you reach this conclusion? Did you get to this statement, like, again, with the claim we should space out the vaccine schedule for children? Did you come up with that idea yourself? Or did somebody else tell you this idea? Did you read this somewhere? Where are you getting your information? Did you go from point A to point D without considering the middle, or did you actually like think this through on their own? It's important to understand their thought process in that. And with that, just asking them, what experience or training do you have on the subject? Um, like if I have my intuition about what I should do with my money, if I should invest in Bitcoin or something, I'm not a financial expert. I don't claim to be. I have very low confidence in my ability to make those kind of financial decisions. So I could be pretty prone to being scammed by one of those Bitcoin scams, or by somebody trying to sell me something that isn't worth that, or putting my money somewhere, because I don't have that experience or training. But if I ask somebody who is an accountant, they're probably like, their intuition is probably more accurate. So it's probably more likely that they would give me a good answer. So when I have a lot of discussions and somebody says, I have this very strong belief that vaccines are harmful. It's like, okay, do you have a license? Do you practice medicine? Have you, had any training on this? Has someone taught you this information? Um, because when you're working with that information and you have that foundational knowledge, it's true that you're not going to be correct all of the time, but you're more likely to arrive at a more correct answer with having that extra knowledge. And something else that's very important, getting into kind of Dunning-Kruger here, is how confident are they in the accuracy of that prior knowledge? So if they say, "Yeah, I have experience in biology, I have training in biology," and their example is that they had an 8th grade science class, well, okay, you have some prior knowledge, but it's not sufficient to make you an expert. You are not the one that really can produce a reliable hypothesis, or a reliable, educated guess on this matter. Um, and something else, of course, is how well do you understand the issue as far as vetting your sources. So many times, I'll be having a conversation with somebody, and they will think that an opinion article is an appropriate source, or a tabloid is an appropriate source. And people that don't know how to determine what sources are reliable, and even what sources are useful, for that particular question. And there was one call that I had recently on Talk Heathen that was kind of infuriating, because this person was uh, claiming that the flood, that a global flood happened in the way described in the Bible. And I kept asking, do you have any evidence for this? And they presented a study. But I went to go look at the study, and the study was about Yersinia pestis and identifying like evidence of the plague in certain places in Eurasia around 5,000 years ago. And like the whole study was just, yes, we have identified this bacterium back in this time period. Here's how we think it impacted the societies and the ecosystem and stuff. There's nothing at all related to the flood. But what this guy did was he took his own pattern that he came up with, because he believed that the flood happened between 5,000 6,000 years ago. So he was connecting dots to say, well, I believe that the flood happened at this time. this study confirms that there were bacteria around that time. Therefore, that confirms my flood belief. And we had to talk him through, like, this source doesn't actually say anything about what you're talking about. This has nothing to do with your claim.
He was also
Um,
claiming, I heard this call
yeah,
about like the Y
yeah,
chromosome having changed and people used to living for thousands of years and this changed all of that. And it was amazing the claims he was making without any evidence.
yeah, yeah. No, it was definitely an example of intuition coming into play and not being at all reliable, and then not being able to back that up. So yeah, so even just ask people what their sources are, and sometimes even before you can get into the meat of the issue, just addressing like, okay, no, can you go find a different source? Like, can we talk about like how to look for a source? Because if they can get that down, they might be more likely to find accurate information and might change their viewpoints. So as far as the facts related to this for the vaccine schedule, the reason why the schedule is set the way that it is because we're recommending the vaccine for the members of the youngest age group at risk for experiencing the disease, um, and at the age for which the vaccine has been shown to be effective and safe. So it's the youngest group that could be exposed, and that it is safe to use the vaccine for and would be effective. And it's important that we do it that way because delaying immunization does delay protection. And if you were to miss that window for certain vaccines, you could miss that window entirely. For a great example is rotavirus. You have to get the rotavirus vaccine within the first like 6 months of life in order for it to be effective. And that is when babies are probably going to die from rotavirus. So sometimes you don't have that extra time to think it over. You just kind of need to take action on it right away. So it is important to have these at the right time. And according to Hutchins et al. From 1989, there was, in this particular study, approximately 1/3 of measles cases in an unvaccinated preschool age child population could have been prevented by administering the MMR vaccine at the same appointment as another vaccine. So something else that we need to consider are um, like social factors and socioeconomic factors, and the fact that especially in the US health system, you are going to have a copay every time you go in to the pediatrician's office, or if you don't have insurance, you're paying for that visit every time in addition to paying for the vaccines. And so if you have parents who maybe are struggling to afford that, if you're trying to capture this population of children, are you more likely to get those vaccines administered if they're only paying one copay? Or if you, like, let's say if you delay it on a delayed vaccine schedule, you're not only getting that child, let's say at their like 4-year-old visit, you're having to see them multiple times within that period, and they're paying a copay each time. So is a parent who's struggling to afford healthcare for their children more likely to get these vaccines over multiple copays or over the one? And in addition to, just affording the copay, you have transportation issues, you have taking time off work, you have other kids that are in school, you have a lot of factors that play into getting access to this care. And it's not always just here, we're going to hand you the vaccine. All of these factors matter in vaccine accessibility. And so having multiple vaccines at one visit greatly improves the access for children to get them. And so this is a bit of a tangent and maybe a bit more interactive. So I have a math problem on the screen, specifically an algebraic equation, a very simple one at that. But this is kind of going back to different perspectives and how we think about a particular problem. So people that have taken algebra at some point in their lives will probably see this equation and know what the goal is, right? A lot of us here know that the goal of this equation is to solve for the x. Um, but someone who hasn't studied a lot of math or who doesn't remember algebra or has never seen a problem like this. For example, even if you took a child and gave them this equation, there's a variable there that people may not be comfortable dealing with. And a few things could happen in this. A person who studied this before will probably say, yeah, X equals 2. Um, and
We've
it's pretty
got
clear
some
that they
mathletes
understand.
in the audience here
We
this
got some
evening.
math, please. Yes, awesome. Yeah, so a lot of people would say, yeah, X is 2. And it's clear that they understand the assignment. They understand what the goal is of this equation. However, some other people might say, you know, they might just ignore X altogether. They might just say, like in their brains, this is something I'm not familiar with. I'm just going to tune this piece out and do what I can. And so they feel like they know how to solve the problem, and they might actually argue with you and say, no, your equation is wrong. It does not equal 10, it equals 6. And someone might say, wait, that's really confusing. What the goal is to solve for X. And it's a moment where if any of you have taught children or if you have taught a class in any way, I know Kara is uh, probably feeling this pretty hard right now. But if you've ever known a piece of information and not considered the fact that somebody else doesn't understand it in the same way, it's hard to understand, where someone else is coming from and where the mistake is being made. And I feel like this happens a lot within scientific discussion. Like we'll be having a conversation and just be talking past each other because we don't see the goal as being the same. Like for the first person, the goal was clearly to solve for X, but the goal for the second person was to solve for the equals. And so this definitely something important to consider. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, and walk people through, where is this disconnect? What are we missing here? And it's also important to understand that in certain problems, you might be the person making that error. And it's important to recognize that if you're not comfortable with a particular problem, or if you don't have the experience, you don't really understand what's going on, it's important to not ignore variables just because you're confused by them. That's an important time to maybe study it, go read about it, go ask some questions about it. Um, but I thought it was just like a fun, silly little example. I know we got some mathletes here who maybe
Yeah.
appreciated it.
Yeah,
Um,
no, I think that's a really good point, Ben, because you're exactly right. And I'm even thinking about among, intellectual circles, it's almost even I don't know if it's more common or not, but the idea of, another purpose that sometimes people have when they're talking about things is to make themselves sound knowledgeable or feel knowledgeable or not have to say, I forgot algebra, or I wasn't in a position when I was younger to be able to actually take a class in algebra, and I don't want to feel stupid. So I'm going to come in here and show you what I do know. And I'm going to be over here talking about the equal sign because I remember about addition and I'm talking about these other numbers. And we've got, some emotional motivations sometimes coming into these discussions too, where it's hard for people to acknowledge that they don't know something because it's, it may feel like a personal attack or a personal failing or something. And when you have that kind of emotional motivation behind reasoning, that can just add additional layers that make the conversation difficult. And not everybody is good with algebra. I'm not. I was better at algebra than geometry, but that's not saying much. I'm not a math person. I'm a people person. Um, I talk to the customers so the goddamn engineers don't have to.
yeah, yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a great analogy. I like that.
yeah, and so kind of with that, so that's kind of setting the stage for getting into some of the arguments themselves. But something important to address is informed consent versus misinformed refusal. And because one of the big arguments that you can get into, and that can be very ethically nebulous for a lot of people, even for people who are very adamantly one side or another, we get to this issue of autonomy and informed consent. And we, of course, want people to make their own decisions about their bodies. Like, that is 100% my goal, is for people to be able to make their own decisions and be happy with those decisions. However, it's very important to recognize, what informed consent actually is, and kind of what is required for that. Because a lot of people who will say that they, are not in favor of vaccines, they lean on this informed consent issue, but a lot of the people refusing vaccination are not doing it because they're well informed. They're doing it because of some misinformation, and usually it's not their own organic argument. Usually it's somebody else who told them something. And it really makes me frustrated because those people believe that that is correct information and they're going to hold on to that. And so you get this issue of, is their decision to refuse, is that actually their decision, or do they feel forced into that decision? Or like, would they have made that decision if they knew different information? And that's why these issues are so frustrating to me, not only the vaccine issue, but alternative medicine and a lot of that, because it is not informed consent. Like, it may be consent, but it's not informed. And I just get very bothered by people who either knowingly scam other people, or like, I understand that there are people who really believe that naturopathy is real, and especially there are like naturopaths and homeopaths who believe that what they're doing is correct. However, there's a whole institution that taught them that that's correct. So it's the many layers of people teaching other people that this is okay. And somewhere down the line, somebody made stuff up. And like, at some point, you have people who are deliberately scamming other people and saying that that is information. And that is really disgusting to me.
So, Dr.
So,
Ben, I
yeah.
took a call on the RfR helpline from a soldier. This was about at the beginning, when we had vaccines and it was going to be mandated. And he was
Mhm.
calling because he said, I heard on a podcast, I'm guessing it was Alex Jones or something, that if I take this vaccine, it's going to alter my DNA. And therefore, I want to conscientiously object as an atheist. It was very weird. He said, can I consciously object to a vaccine as an atheist? And basically, I asked him where he got that information. We talked about that. And at least when the call ended, he was going to get vaccinated. So I was very happy about that. But yeah, he had all these ideas in his head that the vaccine was going to alter his DNA.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great example of this. Um, and yeah, so there are some requirements of informed consent. So it's important that there is full disclosure. Like, there is a discussion beforehand. You are told, like, exactly what the procedure is that's happening to you. You are told what are risks and benefits of this. You're told, everything you need to know to understand the issue. And then you need to understand the issue itself. So um, it's important that the information communicated is actually received, and that it's not just, you know, talked at a person who isn't going to understand what's going on. And something of course, which kind of bridging understanding and competence that we'll get to, is a lot of times when I'm having an informed consent discussion with somebody, like, let's take the example of um, contraception. Like, this is a situation where somebody has full autonomy in their decision. Uh, we have a conversation like, hey, you've said that you want this Nexplanon to be inserted into your arm. Here's exactly what the procedure is. Here's what it entails. Here's what the risks are of this. Here's the medication that's in this particular device, all that stuff. And then I'll usually have the person say back to me what exactly the procedure is, what the device is, all that stuff, in their own words, so that I understand that they know correctly what I've said. And if they don't say it correctly, then it's a time for me to address that maybe I didn't communicate that well to them, because I don't want them to believe something incorrect and then do a procedure that they would have not consented to otherwise. So it's important to make sure that they understand. and that they volunteer, that they are saying, yes, I want this thing. And again, with contraception, I know a lot of the OBGYNs that I worked with in my intern year would hold up the box of the device and say, is this the device that you want in your body? And then they will say yes or no. And it's this very simple thing. It's like, and you can read the box, you can hold the box, you can do whatever. Like, this is the thing. This is exactly what I was telling you about. Do you want this? And they have to make that decision for themselves. They cannot be coerced into it. It needs to be their own decision. Um, they also need to be competent, and this is different from like the courtroom definition of competence. That's a separate issue. But this is more in the medical world. It's kind of saying like, are you of a mental status that can make your own decisions for yourself? For example, if you're in a coma, you cannot make a decision for yourself. I cannot give you an Nexplanon if you are unconscious because, I mean, that is not a life-saving procedure in that particular circumstance. And I can't know if you agree or not. If someone has dementia, there's a lot of procedure that you have to go through to prove whether or not someone can make their own decision, or if someone else needs to make that decision for them. But it's important to know, and something too, if somebody is not under the influence of a particular substance that would inhibit their ability to make their own decision. And then, of course, is that they actually consent. So this is, of course, used for if we're doing a procedure to somebody. But I feel like we need to consider these criteria in addition for when someone is declining something that is life-saving. Um, it's different for, of course, elective procedures. You know, if I ask somebody, do you want Nexplanon, and they say no, okay, that's kind of the end of the discussion. We don't really need to go much farther into that. But if somebody is, bleeding out, and I have the conversation of, would you I believe that you need a blood transfusion. Is it okay if we do this? Uh, and if somebody was, unconscious and not able to make a decision for themselves, for a life-saving procedure, you're going to oftentimes just do it. You have implied consent at that point to do it unless somebody has directives saying, don't do this thing. We have to think about vaccines being more similar to a life-saving measure because, you're preventing life-threatening illness. And in addition to that, this is a public health measure in preventing illness and death in other people. So too often people think of a vaccine as an elective procedure that only affects them and that they can just say yes or no to, but they are declining a life-saving measure. And so we need to think of it more like that. And in that case, you should have a better understanding of what you're refusing. And that's not saying that people shouldn't be able to make their own decisions, because absolutely they should, but they need to be informed appropriately. And I don't believe that everybody is being informed appropriately on that.
Well, I think that's a really good point. I'll just give a personal example of that. I used to not get the flu vaccine because I have a really I don't know, my immune system is garbage, I guess. I don't know. But sometimes when I get vaccines like the flu shot, I get a little bit, sick afterwards for a couple of days. And I had some physicians that I think probably their goal was probably to just convince me to get the shot. And as a result, when I said, "Hey, I don't want that shot because it makes me sick," sometimes they would say, "No, it doesn't. That's not true. The flu shot can't give you the flu. You're making that up." And I was like, "Well, that's not right. I guess I just won't get it." But what I never got, in addition to someone just acknowledging, yes, you might have felt a little bit sick after getting the shot because that was, your immune system, building up the immunity, or I'm sure you can describe that better than I can, Dr. Ben. But what they didn't explain was this isn't just about you and the fact that you might feel discomfort for a couple of days after the shot. It actually hadn't occurred to me that although the flu was an inconvenience for me as a 19-year-old, it was deadly if my grandmother got it potentially. And I didn't understand that my getting the flu shot might mean that I'm protecting my loved ones who are vulnerable to having really bad complications from that. I was just thinking of it in terms as, well, yeah, that gave me the sniffles for a few days, and the doctor kind of disregarded my experience of that. Never mind, I'm never coming back again. And we didn't actually have a more, involved conversation than that. And once I found out more information, I realized, oh, you know what? Actually, let me go ahead and get that. And now I understand what's happening to my body when I'm feeling sick afterwards. And I understand the purpose behind it. So that couple of extra minutes of explanation was really valuable. And the first time I got that, then I realized what was going on.
Yeah,
So
definitely. I'm glad that that worked out well for you in the end. And yeah, and that's a case where communication absolutely matters. And it's almost never the right answer to invalidate somebody else's experience, for sure.
right, because then they're not gonna trust you anymore, and you don't have the opportunity to have that more nuanced conversation about, "Okay, I hear what you're saying. Let's think more about what that is, and have you considered the following?" Like,
Yeah.
why not have a longer conversation?
Yeah. I mean, the healthcare system and paying for physicians to see you for 5 minutes and then walk out the door. Universal healthcare for everyone. There's my there's
Yup.
uh yeah, so getting into some of the common arguments in opposition to vaccine is we're just gonna kind of go through a few different of these and feel free to kind of add discussion points as we go. But of course, one of the most common arguments is that, especially for the COVID vaccine, that these are experimental and that I don't want to be a guinea pig. I want something to be, demonstrated to be safe before I get this. Uh, and this is definitely a misrepresentation of the whole approval process for vaccines and everything that goes into this. There are numerous trials, both in vitro and in vivo, like prior to public release. Um, and this is a very interesting point to analyze just from the outside, especially if you see discussions going on in today's politics, is that you see kind of this, you see kind of this anti-science side, and you also see them trying to utilize some pro-science rhetoric at the same time, and it's kind of conflicting, which is very interesting because a lot of times you get people that will distrust the scientific method, distrust the scientific process as far as like vaccine approval, pharmaceutical approval. Um, but then they will turn around and say, "Oh, well, there wasn't a randomized controlled, like, trial, like, this wasn't a double blind study," and they'll claim to care about that in certain circumstances, but not in others, like, it's this big moving the goalpost thing. So it's like, I won't get the vaccine unless, like, they do a blind, clinical trial, which is unethical to do. Like, it's a misunderstanding of, like, the differences in scientific studies, like, no like, there are many different fields of science, of course, and you can't do the same exact studies in everything, and especially in medicine, you cannot like, allow people to be in a group where they're not receiving any care. You cannot do that. That is unethical. So usually, like, studies are not double blind, unless it's something like you have very similar medications and you're saying, okay, does this one work better than than our current standard? Like either way, your two groups are going to usually be, you have the current gold standard, and then you have the new medication, and they will compare those two. It's almost never new medication versus absolutely nothing. Um, and with regard to vaccines, with being a, you know, life-saving measure. They can't expose two groups of people to COVID-19, give only one of them like the vaccine ahead of time, and let the other ones just be infected and deal with it. That would never be approved um, by anybody. So we can't do those studies. So they're going to claim like these studies weren't done, therefore these weren't tested. Is not true. It's just you have to approach the studies differently with vaccines. but they do undergo trials, and they are, and within the stages of approval as well, you have, and this goes for vaccines and it goes for the majority of pharmaceuticals as well, is that they will test them on healthy people and like the people that they're trying to treat. So you have a group of healthy people that will be exposed to this just to test for side effects. And then, of course, you have, once you kind of figure out that piece, you can take it to other people and say, okay, we also like know about these side effects, but then here's how effective it is. So you have multiple levels of trials, and we're just not seeing them often in the public because it's a long, drawn out process usually. Kind of the next big one is disease severity and a misunderstanding of the particular diseases. And I have a couple statements here. So we have one for measles is just a routine childhood illness, which a lot of people are believing right now. In combination with this other statement about COVID isn't what killed them. And so a couple different facets of this particular discussion, but starting off with measles, measles is a very, very dangerous illness. There's 1 to 3 in 1,000 cases of childhood measles result in death, most commonly by pneumonia, especially in young children. About 1 in 20 cases of measles death will be from pneumonia. You have encephalitis, so you have brain swelling, 1 in 1,000 cases. And a big one that people kind of underestimate are pregnancy complications. Premature delivery might not stir up a whole lot of fear in most people, but to anybody who has worked with laboring patients or have worked with pregnancy, this is terrifying depending on how early that premature delivery is. Like, that is scary for both parties. And of course, failure to thrive for a baby that gets measles, like, on their way into the world. Some very, very scary things. And that's kind of, a lot of these are kind of the acute presentations of measles that can result in death. But there are many delayed complications as well that are incredibly terrifying. The biggest ones being SSPE, which is, I'm not going to go too much into the like pathophys of this, but it's fatal brain swelling essentially that can occur 7 to 10 years after fully recovering. So when a lot of people will say that, uh, like, I'm not going to die of this disease because I'm a young, healthy person, like most people recover from this stuff. They're not taking into account that the people that are getting these delayed complications survived the initial encounter, and most of them fully recovered from their initial encounter. And you get this very, very horrendous brain swelling that kills people. And of course, the highest risk is in people under 2 years of age, and of course, elderly people as well. Of course, a 2-year-old's not going to have this occur 7 to 10 years after. This is occurring more rapidly in those people. But very scary. In addition to immune amnesia, so having your immune system not recognize the same things you already built up immunity to. And imagine having a child going out into the world, not having their bodies not recognize the other vaccines that they've had, and now being at risk for numerous other illnesses, to include, like polio, etc. So it's not just it's not a routine childhood illness. It may have been at one point in time, but it's not benign, and we have plenty of evidence of that. And like, real quick before I get into this, because I didn't have a specific slide for the COVID piece, but something that was really big, and especially with the that documentary, in quotes, about COVID, the one, I can't remember the title, it's losing it, but the one where they were claiming that people with the COVID vaccine got all these like blood clots and stuff. Oh, it's Died Suddenly. That was the movie. There's a lot of rhetoric surrounding the COVID vaccine and just COVID in general, and people saying that, well, they didn't actually die of COVID, they died of pulmonary embolism, or they died of my favorite recently is when people say that, oh, this person died of cardiac arrest. Like, everybody kind of does. Cool. So we have that. But what people don't really get is that when we talk about medical conditions, and especially if you're a resident or if you're a med student on rounds, this is something that you get yelled at for, is if you say, yeah, this person has respiratory distress, that's not good enough. You will get yelled at. And let's say they have respiratory distress from what? What caused that? And so if someone dies of cardiac arrest, like, okay, but what caused the cardiac arrest? Let's say it was um, a heart attack. Cool. So we have that. Okay. What caused that? You have this chain of things that lead to other things. And so even if somebody's ultimate cause of death was a pulmonary embolism, most people don't just randomly have pulmonary emboli. There's something else that caused that. And we know that COVID-19 causes blood clots and can cause pulmonary emboli. So yes, if that was the cause of somebody's death, ultimately COVID-19 was the thing that put all of that into motion for them to die. And then the blood clot was kind of the final thing that let them not survive that encounter. So um, that's just something to think about, especially if we're bridging communication from the medical side to the colloquial side of things, and where understanding of the issue really matters. Um, any comments before I go into this next section?
No, I think that's a really good point. I'm glad you explained that because I have heard that from a lot of people. And when someone says, "Oh no, actually they were misrepresenting the amount of people who died of COVID because they had all of these cases where people had died of all of these other causes." I can absolutely see how that would sound convincing to someone who then had presented to them a list of, look, all these people that they said died of COVID, in fact, died of whatever it was, cardiac arrest or respiratory distress or something like that. That sounds convincing if
Mhm.
you're not a medical professional. um, and
Yeah,
and then it's very easy to deceive people on that basis because you're saying something that sounds scientific to people who do not have a way to evaluate those claims. And that's why it's really, really important to go back to your example from earlier of, do you have the expertise to evaluate this claim? And if not, okay, that doesn't mean we have to accept everything on authority, but let's take a step back and recognize that I may be susceptible to being tricked here and walk
yeah.
that back. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and another real world example, when I was in med school, doing a rotation at a hospital, and this was like during the height of COVID. There was a woman that we admitted to the floor for pneumonia, and she was uh like, we wanted to get a COVID test on her because we had either a possibility, more than likely, of viral pneumonia or bacterial pneumonia, and we needed to know which one it was in order to provide the correct treatment. Like, she was already admitted to the hospital for pneumonia. We already knew she had pneumonia. But she declined the COVID test over and over and over because she didn't want to believe that the pandemic was real. But also she didn't like it's kind of hard to know exactly what her thoughts were at that time, um but like not wanting to know that result, as if getting the test was going to be like giving her some other illness. Like, no, you already have pneumonia. We know that you have pneumonia. We just want to know what it is. And it was very difficult to kind of bridge that misunderstanding in that way. So, um, yeah, so this next one, getting into the idea of natural immunity. So the concept that people just want to let their own immune system do its job. So natural immunity versus acquired immunity. You have like, of course, the limits of your immune system to actually clear stuff is super important. Um, and this is another kind of interesting contradiction that people have, that they want to take these like naturopathic supplements or whatever to boost their immunity. But those things aren't really boosting it. What would really boost their immunity is to get the vaccine. But somehow these are completely different concepts to them, and it's clear people don't really know what immunity is. But of course, your body has its own innate immune system and induced immune system, where you can recognize pathogens and just, wipe it out. However, we have to think about what are the risks with exposing yourself to certain illnesses, the reliability of getting immunity from that exposure, and are you going to sustain your immunity beyond that exposure? And so that's what you have to carefully think about. Um, and that's, probably for somebody who's more interested in kind of the fact side of things and less emotionally making decisions, this might be a great way to go about this, saying, you have natural immunity, or like you could get natural immunity from getting the measles, but what are you risking by doing that? You're risking the complications we mentioned above, but you're also risking not having any immunity from that, especially if you get immune amnesia from that. So you didn't really get any natural immunity from that. In fact, you worsened your natural immunity from that. Um, and with that too, even if you're exposed, let's say, even if you are exposed to COVID-19, um, did you reach a threshold uh, of that virus in order to produce a response? And how much of that response did you get? It's not reliable. Every time you're going to get different results, so you can't really depend on that, and you don't know what the result's going to be. So you are taking a huge risk if you rely on natural immunity, and you're also risking not being able to sustain that immunity. So you've taken all this risk, but don't really have benefit guaranteed from that. And so that might be a great way to approach it, because I think stats are difficult. Stats are very difficult to wrap your mind around for most people. Um, and so I think breaking these down into discussions about, like, instead of just listing out percentages, because numbers are hard to conceptualize, like the reality of what the numbers mean, but saying, like, if you had to risk all of these different things happening to you, and you can't guarantee that you'd be getting any immunity in the future, would you consider the vaccine or not? And that might be a better way for people to conceptualize what decision they're actually making.
So somebody in the chat, Dr. Ben, put something that
Yep.
resonates with me. Never heard, they said enema, but I know they mean the amnesia thing. Terrifying.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when I first heard that, I went out and got a booster. It's like, I think that should be more widely talked about. I don't think it frankly is.
Yeah.
That is frightening, that everything you've built up by getting all the other vaccinations and sometimes diseases just goes away.
Yeah. Yeah. It's absolutely terrifying. I would not want to take my chances with that at all. And we've kind of talked a little bit about alternative medicine, but this is, of course, the person that says, "Well, but my chiropractor said this thing, or my naturopath said this thing," or even in this community, we probably heard a lot of people say, "But my pastor said, my priest said, my religious leader said," which I have a whole other set of thoughts about, religious leaders making medical claims and telling people what to do or not do with regard to their healthcare. Um, but with this particular case, we're going to talk about alternative medicine. And I have a lot of frustration with this particular thing. And it was greatly exacerbated throughout the COVID pandemic because of this assertion of authority without any accountability. And this is something I see with chiropractors as well. Like, you have some naturopathic chiropractors who were making claims about the COVID vaccine or COVID treatments, or they'll do it about cancer treatments when they have no accountability for any of that. Because what they can do, they don't have a license to practice medicine. They have a license to practice whatever alternative medicine they do. And so if they end up like they have some ways to get around like the legal barriers to saying things. Like they can't give specific medical advice about things that they're not licensed to do. But they can make suggestions of like vague things of like, oh, I felt better by not doing this thing, or like I had more energy by taking this supplement. And maybe implying that one thing is better than a conventional treatment. And by making that association, the person listening is going to form this dichotomy in their head and say, oh, this one's clearly better. I don't need this other one. And so they can't really be pinned down and say that they were giving any particular advice because they technically weren't. And so that's kind of infuriating how they will use language in that way. But a lot of times they believe that they have the knowledge necessary to make these claims. Like one of my favorite arguments, especially if you go to Bastyr University's website, it's a naturopathic college. They will list like, oh, here's all the classes that you take at our college. You take anatomy and physiology, you take pharmacology, you take all these classes. And they'll say, well, we actually have more school hours, like credit hours, than allopathic med schools because we have all these things. Like, but you break down what's being taught, and like half the content in each of those classes is about like crystal healing and stuff. Like, no, the content is not equal. You're getting time in the seat, but the information you're learning is incorrect. And even on the subjects that overlap, like, yeah, you can learn anatomy at any level. You learn anatomy hopefully in elementary school. Hopefully you learn certain things about your body earlier on, but that doesn't mean that a fifth grader has the same fount of knowledge that a physician has because they both took anatomy. Like that's a very problematic argument to make, and especially a problematic argument to say, oh yeah, I took 8th grade biology. Let me control your healthcare. Like that's really, really scary. um,
Well, right,
yeah.
and that's something that really frustrates me too, is you'll hear people saying, "Oh, these scientists who have devoted years of their life to studying this very particular thing after going through a decade or more of higher education in medical care are saying
Mhm.
something different than what I learned in 8th grade anatomy class. Obviously, ha ha ha, common sense says that they are wrong. This is different than what you learned in a textbook for 12-year-olds, when in fact the fact of the matter is that the textbook in 8th grade is a very simplified version of information that has a lot more nuance and a lot more information to it that is way above the level of an 8th grader that you have to go to school for a lot longer to understand. But I know I've been frustrated by seeing talking points saying, "Oh, this is different than what I learned in middle school." Well, sure, it's a lot more informative than what you learned in middle school and a lot more complicated than that. But it's easy to convince people who, that's the only version of the story that they ever got was the 8th grade textbook. And it sounds credible if they haven't been through the additional specialized training later. How do you
Right.
recommend talking to people about that issue or convincing them that, yeah, you're right, this does sound different than what you learned in a middle school textbook. Here's why.
Yeah, I'll kind of walk them through that. Like, and oftentimes you can lean on that other person's area of expertise. Like, let's say you're talking to someone who's a mechanic and you say, okay, well, I learned how to like drive an RC car. Like, I know how to put batteries in it. Like, would you say that I can tell people how to change the oil and stuff and, make it within their realm? Because I think people want to take credit for things that they've earned. And for the most part, people don't want other people to take credit for things that they didn't earn. And I think if you help people understand, oh, I'm doing that with this other field. Like I would hate it if someone did this same thing to the thing that I'm good at. Like if I went and started a mechanic shop and I don't know how to do that, I'm sure, and I started taking business from people and wrecking people's cars, and then those people went to the actual mechanics with these problems that could never be fixed. I'm pretty sure they'd be frustrated. And I think making it personal is fairly effective in these situations. But
Yeah, that's a great point. I like that.
but yeah, and something else with this particular thing is like, especially with regard to like Facebook discussions or any kind of online discussions, the people that are going to be commenting are probably the least qualified people. Um, and especially because if somebody has accountability or if they have a license that they are bound to practicing a certain way, um, they're not going to just weigh in when they're not when they are going to have to be responsible for whatever happens from that. So you're less likely to have somebody on Facebook saying like, "What should I do for my COVID?" and have an actual doctor respond anything other than go to the hospital. Like, I mean, I'll freely respond things that I know are going to be a better idea. Like, go talk to a professional is probably the safest thing I can say. But like the reason we have all those disclaimers is because if I say something and somebody takes that advice and they get hurt, and I end up in court, there is no way for me to say I just didn't know better because like I know the scope of my license and I should know better. I should know what I can and cannot recommend, um, and that I will have to take responsibility for those things that I said. So just be cautious if you're seeing things online. But a lot of times, alternative practitioners, they have those language games where they can say, "Oh, well, but I technically didn't do something I wasn't licensed to do," but it's still like they kind of know it was skirting around that. Um, Something else here, it was really interesting, was a bunch of videos that chiropractors, especially one chiropractor in particular, I don't know his name, but he was coming out and saying that, oh, well, ivermectin is great for COVID, or like some other natural remedy was great for COVID because none of his patients that he took care of had bad outcomes from COVID. And you have to think for a second, hold on. And like this goes to the same thing for like people who are doing primary care at the time. It's if someone is going like someone's not going to their chiropractor for respiratory distress requiring a ventilator, like you're not going to get a ventilator at your chiropractor. They cannot provide that service. So to say that, you know, you had better outcomes than an ICU is incredibly dishonest because the people who are showing up to the ICU have already been to the ER. They've already been like possibly already been to the floor and then decompensated, or they went straight to the ICU. The only people going to the ICU are people who need the ICU. So, of course, the ICU physician is going to probably have worse outcomes because their people were the highest risk people. Whereas people who are going to the chiropractor for COVID probably didn't have it bad enough to necessitate a higher level of medical care, or they just, I don't know, made a really messed up decision. But I don't think any chiropractor is doing chiropractic on someone who is unconscious and not breathing. That's unrealistic. So just be
One
careful
would
about
hope.
what, yeah, yeah, just be careful about what claim people are making and what they say that their outcomes are. Um, we kind of talked a little bit about mistrust in conventional medicine, of course, conflicts of interest, and then this naturalistic fallacy of this thing is natural, so therefore it's good, which is interesting because ivermectin is not natural, but a lot of the people that will lean on natural things will also praise ivermectin, and it's not natural. That's a synthetic thing. So, all right, everyone's favorite topic of conversation, toxins. I don't want aluminum in my body. And of course, there's argument about mercury as well, which mercury is not very commonly used anymore, since we found kind of better ways to preserve vaccines. But aluminum is one that a lot of the mercury crowd has kind of shifted to because it is still present in a lot of vaccines. And this is a misunderstanding of what the purpose is of the aluminum. So it is an adjuvant, and it is actually part of providing the immunity. So there are certain compounds, and we don't know exactly why all of these work in the ways that they do. But you introduce some other compound in there, and the cells kind of utilize that in conjunction with the antigen that they're being presented and form a better response, or a more rapid response or a more prolonged response to the particular antigen. So it actually does boost your immunity in having these things around. So they're not just thrown in there for whatever random reason. They actually have a very specific purpose. And in addition, going back to the naturalistic fallacy, aluminum is a naturally occurring element. So you could say, well, aluminum is natural. Don't use the fallacy though. If you're gonna make an argument about aluminum being natural, make sure you're not committing the same fallacy. But you can tell them that aluminum is commonly consumed. It's all around us. It's in the food that we eat, especially if you're eating fruits, they often contain aluminum. The average person consumes about 5 to 10 milligrams of aluminum in your food every day. So this is something that you're constantly intaking, and the average vaccine dose contains way less than that per dose. So you're already getting a lot more, and adding this little bit on is not very significant. It's also removed by the kidneys, and based on what knowledge we have right now, about 50% of it is eliminated after 24 hours. 85% of aluminum is eliminated after 2 weeks, and then 96% is probably like the closest estimate we can get to, studying full clearance after 3 years. So it's something that you're going to constantly intake and constantly get rid of. And based on our current information, it's well eliminated and not really a problem. So, and then I believe this is the last point, is germ theory denialism. And this is a very interesting one. And this is actually one uh, being shared a lot right now, and surprisingly so. But it's in combination, the idea that germs aren't real, but also this idea that you won't get sick if you just make healthier choices. And I think that statement here is more of the common way people will argue for this. There, of course, are people who just don't think germs are real, but is more kind of targeting this victim blaming idea. So the terrain theory, which is not a theory, they're just calling it that. This is a more antiquated idea that pathogens are not the cause of disease, and that sickness just results from imbalanced internal and external environmental factors. And so these are people that are saying, like, you need to take all these supplements, you need to do all these like health conscious things. And I'm not saying that those aren't important. Like, it is important to eat healthy foods. It's important to exercise. It's important to take care of your physical and mental health. Like, absolutely do those things. But it's important to understand that even if you do those things, you can still get sick, because that's not the whole reason that you're sick. And this is an idea that is very easy to be believed by religious people, of course, because there's this idea that sin exists in the world and sickness is a result of that. And um, it puts the blame on the person instead of on the illness. Uh, and so it gives certain people, for one, a false sense of security to say, well, I'm a young, healthy person. I do X, Y, Z. I'm not going to get this illness. But then for other people who maybe have chronic illness, or they have some other factors that
Mm.
would predispose them to certain illnesses, it's saying your sickness is your fault. You did something wrong, and that's why you're sick. And so even if you have like the young, healthy person who gets complications from measles, you have them maybe asking themselves, what did I do wrong that had this happen to me? And it might not have been anything. You might have just been the unfortunate minority people that get sick. And you might be the minority that gets sick even if you're vaccinated. We know that that happens, but it's not your fault. Um, and it's important to not make people think that. And this is definitely a way that people will uh, like try to take advantage of other people. That's going back to alternative medicine, how you get a lot of people buying supplements that they can't afford or buying therapies that are not going to help is because they think that all those actions are going to prevent anything from happening. They think that they are taking actions to not be at fault. And that can, of course, uh, like lead to anxiety disorders, depression disorders, or worsen ones that people already have. And I just find this as a tactic to be particularly uh, problematic, especially within religious communities. I know that especially Mormon communities are very much into essential oils. Uh, there are certain subsets of religious groups that will rely on this kind of rhetoric to get people on board, and then further uh, promote their own kind of religious doctrines and kind of the same cycle of everything is your fault, you're not good enough, that kind of thing.
Dr. Ben,
Yep.
is this also RFK Jr.'s mindset, especially regarding the
Yes.
environmental impact?
Yes. Yeah, and that's exactly why I put that slide in. Before the last time that I gave this talk, it was uh I was like, I didn't have that slide in, but then thinking about it, I was like, oh no, I need to put something about this because I think it was actually that day that I was writing this that RFK Jr. like had said something. I was like, no, I actually do need to talk about this. So
Well, I appreciate you bringing that kind of timeliness to this presentation because, this is something that we're dealing with right now, um, for a lot of reasons, which we don't have to go into. But, this is a conversation that a lot of people are having. And, I wonder if it might be interesting to see the poll results about
yeah.
people's experience of having these kind of conversations. Let's see. Let me find it. Okay, here it is. Okay, let me share those results. So, yeah, when we asked people who are here in the program today, have you ever had a frustrating discussion about vaccines? 20% of people said yes, it happens all the time. And 53% of people, in addition to that 20%, said yes, it's happened before. Only 27% of people said no. So, the majority of people here today, have reported that they have had frustrating conversations about this topic. And I don't know about y'all, but I feel like I'm hearing about it a little bit more frequently than I used to,
Of course,
say
as we
10
talked about
years
in the
ago.
pre-show, this does not say which side of the argument the person who answered it was on. It's like the poll
That's
question
true.
is America moving in the right direction? And it's always like, oh,
Mhm.
25% think yes and 75% no. But of that 75%, half think it's wrong to go one way and half of them think it's wrong to go the other way.
Right. We don't want to presume too much based on our very unscientific poll results here in the RfRx Zoom room, for sure. Um, but I think we can conclude that approximately 73% of the people who answered this poll have had a frustrating discussion about vaccines or believe that they have.
Yeah.
um, and that's about as far as we can go. So let's look at the other questions while we're on here. We had kind of a quiz question for the second one, and we talked a little bit about this in the show. Which of these is the most rapidly transmissible? By which we mean easy to catch. And we had a selection of options here: the common cold, COVID, measles, HIV, and ringworm. And Measles got the highest result at 41% of people selected measles. That was just a little bit ahead of the common cold. 34% of people guessed common cold. 14% were for COVID and 10% for ringworm. I love that. Now, let me ask you, Dr. Ben, of those, which is the most rapidly transmissible?
It is the measles, and the factor that we use to kind of model this is the R naught, so like R with the little 0,
Mhm.
and that's kind of how likely are you to get this from being in a room or having exposure to this. The R naught for the common cold is somewhere around like let's see all kinds of numbers around like 2 to 3, maybe up to 4 or 5, depending on like what strain. I think like 3 is kind of common. But measles has an R naught of 12, like somewhere around like 12 to 18. So significantly higher likelihood of catching measles from exposure.
Mm, fair enough. And then, oh yeah, someone is asking R not. It does sound like R not, like you are
Yeah.
not going to get it, but that's
Yeah.
not it. It's a statistical uh connotation, right? In not connotation, but
Yeah.
it's yes, Rob put it in the chat.
The
Awesome.
R0. Yeah.
R0. Okay. Okay, and then after that, we asked our most serious and important question of the evening, which I know we've all been dying to hear the answer to. We asked our audience which Gallifreyan doctor is Dr. Ben's favorite. And we listed several, but not all, of the doctors from the Doctor Who universe. I'll just say the ones that got the highest votes. David Tennant got 32%. And, when is that not the right answer to a question about which doctor is the best one? Well, tonight is that night. A close runner up was Jodie Whittaker at 28%. But tell us, Dr. Ben, who is your favorite doctor of the Doctor Who's?
It is Matt Smith because I started watching in season 5, and so I feel like a lot of people end up liking kind of their first.
Mhm.
Um, so that is mine. I will forever. I like the others too, and of course I love David Tennant, but Matt Smith kind of I just like his kind of brand of quirkiness.
I do like his brand of quirkiness. That's a fair point. And that's interesting you say people usually like their first Doctor. I started watching the reboot of Doctor Who when it first came out, and I happened to be studying abroad in London at the time. And the first Doctor, when they, restarted this 20 years ago or whenever it was Christopher Eccleston, who got one vote. I didn't vote for him, but I'm glad someone did. Rob asserted in the pre-show that that was no one's favorite doctor, but there
I
is
can't
someone.
believe anybody. Christopher Eccleston himself must be watching this RfRx. That's my only, or maybe his mom is watching it. That's why.
Oh, I hope his mom would vote for him. I love that. Okay, well that's awesome. I did like Matt Smith as well. He was a great doctor. And Dr. Ben is a great doctor, and we appreciate him joining us this evening. See that smooth segue I just did there?
Brilliant.
Hey.
Um, well, we are close to the end of the show, but I know we've got a couple of questions. But first, Dr. Ben, where can people find you if they want to see more of your work and your content?
Yeah, you can find me on YouTube. If even if you just do at Dr. Ben Hamilton, you can find me on the YouTubes. My own channel. You can also find me on the Transatlantic Colin Show. You can find me on Talk Heathen. And the also I'm on Twitch a lot. I've been streaming a lot more on Twitch because if people don't know, the military is purging their trans people, and so I'm on admin leave right now. And
Mhm.
so I'm hanging out. So I've been doing some Twitch streams, usually just like playing some fun games. Lately, it's been Power Wash Simulator. Uh, so come hang out. We'll have discussions while I power wash the Shrek expansion pack. And there's also trivia nights on, well, trivia slash game nights on Friday nights, right after Truth Wanted. So at 9:30 p.m. Eastern time is usually when we go live. So come hang out. And that's when, if you come to game night, anybody is able to play. So usually the people on the panel are people that I know because I want to make sure that there aren't trolls showing up. But anyone in the side chat is able to play, and we have a great time. So
And how do people join that? Is that on Twitch?
it is on Twitch. Yes. Well, actually, I'm dual streaming them to Twitch and YouTube now. So
Excellent. So they should go to your YouTube channel and they'll be able to catch up with
yep,
that?
yep. They can go to
Excellent.
either, and they'll be able to find
Okay.
it.
And someone was wondering if there's an email address, or should they message you in any of those other platforms that you mentioned, or should they contact us and then we can get in touch with you?
Yeah, they can contact. I think contact you all, and then
Perfect.
we can figure out the best way to contact them.
Absolutely. So you know how to get in touch with me, RfRx at recoveringfromreligion.org. And awesome. Well, with that, can't wait to learn more about what you're doing. And I hear you might even have a line of really good smelling products coming up in the near future. I don't know if it's too soon to tease that or not.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm so of course with the uncertainty of employment while I wait to go back to residency in the civilian side of the world. Uh I'm getting into like soap and candle making. I know Kara's coming to visit me in the near future, and so hoping to have some cool stuff. And actually, we got some cool stuff coming. Like, and this is also kind of goes along with the Twitch streams. So I've been finding I love Halloween. Halloween is my favorite holiday. And like how people make those little Christmas villages, or like they collect the stuff at the Christmas villages. So I went thrifting, and I'm going to keep going thrifting and finding the little Christmas village things, and then I'm doing streams. I'm doing streams where I paint them Halloweeny, and there's this one of them that it actually is a candle holder, so I'm going to paint it on a stream, make a candle to go in it, and then that'll be a piece that I'll probably put on Etsy, and some person can purchase that. I know Glenda does art streams and stuff. Uh, and so those pieces will probably be available. I'm not a great artist, but it's fun anyway. And then like I do have some soap molds that I got that are cryptids. So I'm gonna have like Mothman and
Yes.
Sasquatch and stuff. So we got some stuff coming. So
I am so ready for it. Let us know where to go and procure these things, especially when it gets a little closer to Halloween times. We're going to
yes,
want to know how to
definitely.
get these cryptid soaps. I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah, it'll
So,
be fun.
okay. Well,
So
I can't wait for that. Yeah. We're gonna have some Mothman in our lives this October, thanks to Dr. Ben. Okay. Well, look forward to that. And we're just about at time to wrap up. I think we've got time for maybe one question. Rob, would you
oh,
like to? Oh, yeah, go ahead.
one thing. I think so for the link that wasn't working, I did
Did I
change
put the wrong
my
link?
handle, so that would probably be why.
Oh, that
Um
would be why. How should
yeah,
we
because I
search
changed
it?
it just my name. Uh
Oh,
at Dr. Ben Hamilton now. So it's just my name to make it easier.
okay. I'll put the corrected link in there. Sorry about that. Um, and while I'm doing that, Rob, would you like to ask the question?
Okay, let me take the first question here. That was in the script. What if I'm talking to someone about vaccine hesitancy and neither of us is a medical professional? How can I convince them to trust medical information from a credible source?
Ooh, this is an interesting one. And I think that the discussion in that case needs to address what their distrust is. Um, because if there's a particular reason, like if we think about the tree in the presentation, like of course their distrust of vaccines is kind of the tip of the iceberg. There's some other reason why they're hesitant about vaccines. So kind of exploring that. And I think some of the ways that you can pin that down are addressing questions to kind of gauge where their hesitancy and where their distrust kind of specifically lies. Like, because a lot of people, they'll be hesitant about vaccines or hesitant about certain medications, um, but will still trust conventional medicine as far as emergency care. So that's when you can ask them, okay, so you're willing to trust a surgeon to fix you after you have a car crash. What's different about these situations? What's different about like that trauma surgeon versus a pediatrician who's giving a vaccine? Because the data that led to the standards of care is like the standard of evidence is the same for these guidelines. And so if you can kind of pin down like and help them understand that it's okay to have distrust in individuals, it's okay to have distrust in institutions, but then exploring like what is the reason for that distrust? Is the distrust accurately placed? Like it's okay to say, medicine has been horrible to people in the past. It's been horrible to women. It's been horrible to people of color. It's been horrible to a lot of different minoritized groups. Um, but I can still maintain that mistrust and have trust in vaccines and have trust in surgeries. So I think kind of pinpointing where do they fit on that spectrum and then going from there.
Okay, well, thank you. So there's a similar question, maybe from the other perspective. How do you talk to a medical professional who's anti-vax?
Uh, I hope you're not going to that person because I would say maybe pick somebody else. Um, it's a case with a medical professional. If you're not one, like if it's in a professional setting, it's going to be hard for you to convince them because like they're probably going to, if they're going to be convinced, it's probably going to be by another clinician or by some some peer of theirs. If it's just in everyday conversation, again, it's kind of difficult. If it, on a friend level, I think maybe addressing more of the like it's gonna be hard with a medical professional to argue facts with them because they're going to assume that they know more. And they might know more about certain things, but they for some reason have this cognitive dissonance about a particular issue. And they're probably not going to be persuaded by the facts that a layperson is bringing them. I would maybe shift it to a more emotion focused argument or a more like uh social argument, kind of taking it outside of that so they can actually engage with it more honestly instead of getting hung up on authority. uh but if they're your provider, I would just say if you can find a different one because it's concerning when somebody like, and we're all going to have like views that are incorrect. We're all going to have something that we're wrong about in our practice. But if you maintain a low standard of evidence for that one thing, it makes me concerned that you have kind of poor critical thinking with other things.
Have you personally met anybody in the medical profession that is, let's maybe not anti-vax, but like hesitant?
I have. I have. And there yeah, their reasons for being so are often religious. So it's not saying that religious people can't be good clinicians, but it's just another thing of you're uh you're believing something without a level of evidence that I hope you're not using that same standard with other issues.
That makes sense. Well, I know we've got a couple of more questions, but we're kind of at the end of time. Dr. Ben, do you have time to stick around with us for the hangout at all?
Yeah, I can hang out for a little bit.
Awesome. Okay. Well, then let's go ahead and wrap up. And if we didn't get to your question, let's talk about it in the hangout while we've still got Dr. Ben with us. And real quick, don't forget to join us next week. We will be here again, same bat time, same bat channel. We'll let you know the topic as soon as I have confirmed our speaker for next week. But coming up the following week, the following couple of weeks, we have Ross Blotcher and Bailey Harris coming up. Cannot wait to hear from those two. And don't forget to follow us on social media. We are on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, and of course, YouTube. And one great thing about if you follow us on those channels is not only that you get to see when we have new content coming out and you can engage in the conversations on all those places, but it also helps other people find us who may be looking for resources to help them recover from religion. So please feel free to follow, like, and share and all of that on all of those if you're comfortable having that on your profile. And with that, Rob, how else can people get involved?
Well, they can definitely volunteer for this organization, just like we do. We've learned that healing can come from helping other people. We find meaning and purpose by volunteering for recovering from religion and helping those people too. All of our services are supported by our staff of volunteers, and we are always in need of more people. There's all sorts of jobs besides working the helplines, which is the thing you hear, about when RFR gets recommended on call-in shows. But they don't talk about the other things that we need. We need people to find and vet and post good resources for our clients to use. We need people to host the support groups that you heard about earlier. We need people to support the online community by moderating it. We even need IT people because we do all of our software ourselves. And improving the software helps our clients as well as the agents find good information for the clients. So to apply, to volunteer, fill out the form on our main page. It's right at the top. There's a link that says volunteer. Go to recoveringfromreligion.org. And lastly, let me mention there's a 3-minute video on our main page, which I looked today has 3,000 views. And you can share that with those in need. It's 3 minutes about everything this organization does. Send it to anyone who you think could benefit from our services. And for those watching us here and can't looking at the link that Cara just put in the Zoom, it is an easy look up on YouTube. It's RFR What We Do.
Yeah, definitely check that out. And with that, Gail, would you like to wrap us up with? I normally invite Dr. Ray to do the benediction as a high priest of the flying spaghetti monster, but I'm excited to know what closing thoughts you can leave us with yourself.
Thank you, Kara. Dr. Ray, like I am and Glenda is, are preparing to go to NanoCon this weekend. It's a Nashville-based gathering, the Nashville Nuns Convention. And so Dr. Ray was kind of underwater with trying to get everything ready. And so he gave me the opportunity to close us out. Dr. Ben, thank you so much for coming. I am so impressed with the science that you're teaching us and your patience and that little needle that you're threading with not patronizing us with how little we know, but not overwhelming us by how much we know. That's not an easy thing to do. And it is so easy for us as we deal with these folks that struggle so much with accepting science. It is so easy to fall into the snark. It's one of my favorite things to do. And while there may be a time and a place for it, I so appreciate your kindness and your patience. Not that they don't deserve ridicule. It's not even that. It's just the respect with which you deal with what they don't understand and they don't know. And I'm deeply grateful that your attitude helps us to know what our attitude should be, that arming ourselves with scientific information and then trying the best that we can to be gracious and patient and understanding and thoughtful and kind and all of those things is really your values as a humanist, and I appreciate you sharing it that way. As usual, we thank all of our folks that make it all happen here, Kara and Rob, but the behind the scene folks too, Nikki, who stays up until the wee hours, broadcasting across the waves, and the other folks that put it into the proper places for podcasting and for YouTube, and all the RFR volunteer family who do all the gajillions of little jobs that Rob mentioned, the different little pieces that we put together. If you'd like to be part of that, we would love to have you join our volunteer family. Don't forget that registration is still open for the fall excursion. It is the highlight of our year, and we don't just hear that from our clients. The leadership and the directors of RFR say the same thing. So if you're considering joining us, please do. We will do everything we can to try to help you get there. We have the ability to defer some of the cost because we have gracious and generous donors who underwrite some of that. And so don't let that keep you from going. If you can possibly make it, all the info is at the Recovering from Religion site. Kara has posted the fall excursion link. So please join us if you can. I look forward to seeing you next week. I will be driving across the country after NanoCon. So fingers crossed that I can make it next week. But if not, I'll be back the following Monday. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the hangout. See you.